Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Peter Svidler. I will be doing my final recap of the Altibox 2017 Norway Chess Tournament, a recap of round 6. It has been an interesting round, and I think you could maybe see a bit of a pattern in this. The most interesting round of this tournament so far has been undoubtedly round 4, played immediately after the rest day, with this round coming in second place, and this round has been played directly before the rest day, so perhaps once again the feeling that you can expand that little bit of additional energy because you don't have to play another game on the next day helped players create a bit more. In round 6 there were 3 draws and 2 decisive results, and of those 2 games I've chosen for this video a game Levon Aronian played against Vladimir Kramnik, and without further ado, let's go into that game. Levon with white played 1d4, which is what he does normally. Vladimir replied by d5, c4, e6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3. This, I think, is the preferred move order against Vladimir these days, and he does seem to get this opening a lot. And he used to play bishop e7 here quite a bit, but these days he almost exclusively plays the semi-Tarrasch with c5, cd5, and knight takes. And his results in this opening have been exceptional. He pretty much never loses, and has even won a couple of games, one of them in particular against me, so I know full well just how well he understands these positions. e4, knight c3, bc3, cd4, cd4, bishop b4 check. This is the absolute main line. Bishop d2, takes, castles, bishop c4, knight d7, castles, b6. And these days I believe the main line is supposed to be a4, bishop b7, bishop d3. Black plays, I believe, knight f6, rook e1, h6. And there has been a number of games starting from this position, including yet another game I personally played against Vladimir, a5, ba, rook a5, queen c7. There's a lively theoretical discussion, perhaps surprisingly, starting from this very position. But today Levon chose something else, and for a line which has been discussed at the top level for many decades, there have already been important and very interesting games starting from this position. I believe played, for instance, by Pologaevsky, so a long time ago. Rook ac1, bishop b7, and d5, which is what Lev played. According to perhaps somewhat the incomplete database I consulted when writing the notes for today's game, has only been played once by players rated around 2300, so a very, very rare subvariation of the semi-Tarrasch. And spoiler alert, it probably does not refute the opening. Knight c5, a very logical move here, because although black can of course take on d5 immediately, if he can play knight c5 first, more or less forcing white to go rook e1, that's maybe a bit strong, but you don't really want to play d6, fe6 so early. And the pawn on e4 is currently hanging. Rook fe1. And here Vladimir made another improving move before taking on d5. He played queen f6. The point of this move is that d6 knight takes e4 of course is impossible, but also if white plays e5, black has a very strong reply in queen g6, and white is not yet ready to open the long diagonal, and therefore e5 is completely unacceptable, because black immediately gets a very comfortable game. d6, bishop f3 loses. In view of that, Lev started with queen e3, and this is an interesting turning point in the game, because after some thought, but not very long thought, I believe, Vladimir went for rook ac8 here, a move which is not bad in itself, but I wonder if Vladimir thought that maybe he should preserve as much life as possible in the position. And here perhaps it's worth noting that this game was extremely important in the context of the tournament situation. Hikaru, before round 6, was leading alone on +2, 3.5 out of 5. And these two players, Levon and Vladimir, were his direct pursuers on 3 out of 5 and playing each other. and therefore a victory for one of them would set them up fantastically well for the rest of the tournament. And rook a8 does seem to be a move which, although not bad, it drastically differs from its main alternative, which is of course finally capturing on d5, in that rook a8 leads to a lot wilder positions, and positions which at first glance look like they could very well be very double-edged. If e takes d5, white has a choice between taking with a pawn, after which black can, for instance, play rook d8, rook d1, rook d6, and after something like rook d4, and here I think it's not a bad idea to stop rook f4 and make rook f4 not win a tempo for white, which is why queen d8 is a move. And we reach a very strange position in which black, after something like, I don't know, a3, which is a useful waiting move here for white, black doesn't actually threaten to take because of rook d1. But if black plays something like h6, we reach a position in which it's extremely difficult for either side to make any progress, and maybe after playing h6, black could maybe even think, after something like maybe h3 or h4, black could think about playing bishop a6, and if bishop a2, perhaps bishop b5, suddenly starting very actively to fight for the e-file. And I believe black is just fine here. I don't think this position is at all scary for an experienced player who knows what he's doing in these structures. And Vladimir definitely is one such player. And if white takes with the bishop, you take with the bishop, e5. And here it's worth noting that it is possible that Vladimir felt he is not equalizing fully here, because if you play some kind of a template move here, like rook a8, rook c d1 and rook d6, after knight e5, the knight does get to c6. And these positions, they do tend to be quite awkward for black. They're not horrible by any means, but because the knight controls the very important d8 square, and white is also completely in control of the e-file, white will be running this show for a while, and making progress when black has such nice blockading pieces will not be easy. But this is not a pleasant position to play. And this is where, of course, I had a much better situation than Vladimir, who was facing these choices at the board, because I can consult the machine. And the machine, after thinking for a while, comes up with a solution which I think is extremely easy to miss over the board, because it looks slightly unnatural at first glance. Machine goes queen d6, rook c d1, and then it just physically stops knight f3 from coming to e5 by playing f6. And in this position, sort of regardless of what white does, it's important to note that knight d4, queen takes d5 is perfectly fine for black. There are no dangerous jumps for this piece, and black just wins a pawn. And after something like h4, hoping for maybe h5, followed by knight h4, black goes queen d7. It's also possible to play h5, there's nothing particularly wrong with it, but queen d7 is simple enough. h5, rook e8, we trade one pair of rooks, we offer a second rook trade, and I honestly believe that had Kramnik gone for this line, he probably would have held this position without breaking a sweat, so to speak. Instead of that, he played rook ac8, and whilst after that his position is still manageable, it becomes a lot harder to navigate, as you will see in a moment. e5, queen g6, d6, f6, all very logical, and I think Vladimir perhaps was even baiting Levon a bit into this e5 and d6 maneuver, perhaps believing that white is overextending here, but that's not entirely true. Knight h4 is very strong here, sidestepping the potential trades, and the move Vladimir made here is perhaps already a very serious mistake, but it's the most natural and the most obvious move in the position, so it's not surprising that he played it. Instead of queen g4, which is what Vladimir chose, it's much better to play queen h5, and after g3, you can choose to play a slightly more complicated game with king h8, but you have to be prepared to enter positions like, for instance, f4, takes, g5, knight g2, and queen g4 with a position which looks unclear, but the machine suggests black is fine here. Or after bishop e2, a very typical motif, and also a reason why you have to play king h8 first, I believe, so that after queen e8, which is a very strong move, it's easy not to see. Queen takes g5 is not a check, and now black plays queen c6, and the long diagonal is so open for the black pieces that white has to make this immediate draw by perpetual. Also after queen h5 g3, if you don't want to leave dangerously, you can take on e5 twice, and in this position the machine suggests a very weird line starting with king h8, f4, knight d3, rook h5, creating a very strong threat of knight g6 followed by bishop takes e6, and now bishop e4 is apparently completely equal, but that looks kind of dangerous. And a much more human move here is rook f6, after which the machine suggests a normal continuation would be something like knight g2, rook d8, rook d1, bishop d5, knight e3. If instead of knight e3 white takes, you take, and knight e4, and black wins this pawn back because knight c3 is a threat. So knight e3, and here both bishop f3 and also king f8 with the idea of once again doing this seem to be holding for black. But once again, queen g4, which Vladimir played in the game, looks like the most natural move in the world. You attack the knight on h4, you more or less force white to play g2, g3, and now your bishop on b7 looks like a monster. The queen on g4 is glancing at the bishop on c4, which means that rook cd1 will be a difficult move to play. Also, it protects the pawn on e6. What could be more natural? But here black is already in trouble, and he should have played king h8 here, which is really a not obvious move to make at all. After which white has a choice between playing f4 immediately, which seems to lead to better positions for white. It's not really obvious at all why this is better for white, but the machine suggests that after g5, knight g2, all the possible complications start favoring white. Or if you want to do it slightly differently, after king h8, you can take and play f4 here. And once again, machine starts preferring white quite seriously, although the game is far from over. And black could still fight here after, for instance, queen h5, rook cd1, and maybe queen e8 works, maybe bishop c6 has to be played. But this is still a position in which nothing is decided. And somewhat surprisingly, after f takes e5, which looked like a very, very natural move, and queen takes e5, black is already in desperate trouble. This is close to lost for black, which is not obvious at all. When we reach this position in our live commentary, at some point I began suspecting this is not great for black, because we looked at this position for about 5 minutes talking about various options, and the more we spoke about this, the less I understood what black is supposed to do here. It's extremely difficult to make moves here. All of your options suddenly look very inadequate. And also, I did not realize it at the time, but there is a motif which you will recognize from Levon's brilliant victory over Magnus. The queen on g4, which looks like an attacking piece, is in fact already in really, really big trouble. It has no moves, but currently there's nothing attacking it. But this is a theme which will come into play very strongly, very, very soon. And after some thought, the machine starts saying that this position is already horribly bad for black. For a while I thought maybe king h8 leads to positions you could try and save, but in fact king h8 also loses, more or less by force, to a very beautiful idea. White plays f3. I don't know how easy that would have been to find for Levon, but I think he probably could have found it. And after bishop takes f3, white goes bishop takes e6. Rook takes f3, I suppose, just loses to bishop e2. That probably is the explanation for this tactical shot. Bishop takes f3, bishop takes e6, knight takes e6. If you take with the queen, it's even worse. The same tactic works even, but even stronger. White takes on c8, takes, d7, rook d8, and here even knight takes f3 wins on the spot. But after knight a6, a very similar thing happens. d7, rook d8, takes. Here we have to take on e6, but this still wins on the spot because of a very beautiful geometrical idea. You have to cover the e8 square, so bishop h5, and now white plays rook c6. Once again, the only move not to lose on the spot is bishop g4, and here knight f3, which is I think a move which is very easy to miss, but it just wins immediately because the knight comes to e5, and then let's say if black takes on d7, you play rook d6 and come for the bishop. And if black plays, for instance, king g8, knight e5, bishop f5, the bishop can be driven away from this diagonal, and once again black will lose this position. A very, very beautiful idea, but it does seem to be winning more or less by force after king h8 f3. Instead of that, Vladimir played rook cd8, and here after f4 the idea becomes a lot more obvious. I'm not sure if he already knew just how bad his position is, but I think by this point Vladimir started understanding that despite having two tempi, it's extremely difficult for him to protect against the idea of either rook e3 or rook c3, followed by simply bishop e2, the queen will go to h3, white plays bishop f1, queen returns, and then simply h2, h3, and this queen has no squares. And despite having two moves to do something about it, there's really not a lot black can actually do. After some thought, Vladimir played rook f6, rook c3, and here, if black goes bishop a6, the simplest solution is to take and play king g2, renewing the idea of h3, rook h6, and here h3, queen h5 is much better for white, but maybe not winning. But white does win by force by playing f5, knight c5, rook c5, and fe. And for instance, if rook takes h4, a demonstration of how strong very far advanced passed pawns are. White goes e7, queen h3 check, king f2, queen takes h2, king e3. The queen on e5 covers the entire board. The only move is rook e8, and now after d7 it's probably something like mate in 10. White is completely winning here. Instead of that, Vladimir played rook h6, hoping to escape via h5. And here you could maybe argue that Levon spoiled his masterpiece a little bit by not playing knight f5, which would have won on the spot, because if rook f6, you can just take on f6 and go knight h6 check. And if rook g6, you just pick up this exchange by knight e7 check, or you could continue hunting the queen even. So knight f5 would have, I think, ended the game there and then. There's just no squares for this rook. If you go rook h5, bishop takes e6 is almost immediate mate as well, because once the pawn on e6 is gone, white just breaks through and gives mate along the e file. But the move that Lev chose, whilst prolonging the game a bit and also making a bit of a technical victory of what would have been a complete blowout, is still completely winning. Bishop e2, queen h3, and now not bishop f1, queen g4 and h3, because once again queen h5 is a move, but queen g5, renewing the idea of bishop f1 and also the threat of bishop g4, and also hitting the rook on d8, of course. And the only move black can really make here is queen takes h4, which Vladimir eventually found. If black takes on h4 with the rook, we give a check from e7, the king cannot go back because of queen e8 mate, king g6, and the simplest way to win here is just bishop d3 check, and after knight takes d3, rook takes e6 is probably mate, but you can also go queen takes e6 and once again win in a very simple technical fashion. Queen h4, gh, rook g6. By doing this, black kind of avoids resigning immediately, but after rook d1, his position remains completely lost. He was also very short on time at this point, but even with a lot of time, I don't believe he would have saved this position. Bishop d5, f5, takes, and black is just not in time. If he takes on d6 here, if he could only take the pawn on d6 from white, then maybe the conversion would have required some technique, but here white actually wins a piece by force. f e6, rook e6, bishop g4, rook e5. Unfortunately for black, rook e4, bishop f3 is really no good. And after rook e5, white has rook c5, bc5, rook d5, rook d5, and bishop e6 check, and black has to resign. Instead of that, Vladimir played king f8, to which Levon replied by taking, and playing bishop c4. A very nice, precise move, removing the last good defender. Objectively, black probably should take on c4 here, but his position is completely lost after that, of course. Vladimir played bishop f5 here, and the conversion from here was also exemplary. Left played rook e3. If black plays knight e4, which is what he would like to do, white wins on the spot by temporarily returning the exchange and then winning every single piece that black has. Vladimir played g6, rook e7, rook d7, and resigned after rook d1 because In order not to get mated, he needs to start giving away all of his pieces once again. This is mate, one of, I think, 3 possible mates into white has in this position. And of course, if rook e7, d, king e8, then the simplest way to win is to play bishop f7 check. And the e-pawn wins. A very efficient and very nicely played game by Levon, who continues playing very, very nicely with the white pieces. And it's the second tournament in a row where his play, I think, is extremely impressive after his blowout performance in the Grenke Classic. After round 6, before the second and final rest day, the situation in the tournament is Hikaru and Levon have 4 out of 6, which is +2. And then there is half the field on 50% and half the field on -1, which is a bit of an unusual situation. The other decisive game of the day featured a very nice positional victory for Vishy Anand against Fabiano Caruana in a game in which you start by thinking white has to be better because of the 2 bishops he has against a bishop and knight in a reasonably safe looking position for him. But the position very soon stopped looking safe, and frankly, I believe Black's play was very, very impressive, whilst Fabiano could perhaps question some of his choices in that game, and he ended up losing immediately after the first time control. On that, I would like to thank everyone who was watching our coverage of Altibox 2017 Norway chess. From round 7 onwards, Jan will be doing live commentary with Niels Grandelius, which should also be fantastic infotainment, so stick around for that. As for me, I will be playing some chess myself, and I wish you all continued enjoyment of our coverage. Thanks for watching. This has been Peter Svidler for Chess24.